everyone, welcome to the show. My name is Amanda Ostrander. I am a teacher-turned-homeschool mom, and this is Raising A to Z, a place where we talk about all things homeschooling. And today, we're talking about how do you actually start homeschooling. Summer tends to be a time where we have a lot of people who decide that it's the perfect time to start homeschooling. That when fall comes and when the new school year starts, that they're going to want to homeschool their kids. There are certain times of year where that tends to be more popular. January is another popular time for people to start homeschooling, kind of right after Christmas break with the new year, new year, new homeschool kind of thing. Another really popular time is right after spring break. A lot of people like to take these natural kind of breaks in the school year and make those kind of like the time when they cut the cord and decide to do their own thing when it comes to homeschooling. So the summer though tends to be the most popular. Why? I think we all know why. Because you have a whole several weeks off, especially here in North America, and you get a whole bunch of time off where you as a parent can start to wrap your head around planning and getting things ready and getting things set up, and researching, doing all those things. And so it feels like it's a point in time where you can kind of prep for a new year without feeling overwhelmed. So it is probably the most popular time for parents to make the decision to homeschool. It is also the most popular time for parents who have children who are not in the school system yet, who decide that they want to be homeschooling rather than putting them in the school system. So you will see that this is kind of the time where you have a lot of parents who have new kindergartners or preschoolers. This is kind of when you're seeing kind of that influx of those age brackets coming into your homeschooling community. Whereas I do tend to find that the kids who are starting homeschooling in December or March, they tend to be already in the system and tend to be pulled out. So you tend to see more third, fourth, fifth, sixth graders kind of being pulled at that point. And actually I find March tends to be mostly upper elementary, kind of high school kids. Just an observation, but that tends to be kind of the trend that I notice. But it is summer. A lot of parents are making that decision of if we're gonna homeschool, now's the time to make the decision. And a lot of them are a little overwhelmed. Rightfully so. Homeschool is a big decision. You are taking your children out of the public system. You are taking on a huge responsibility, and it can be a little overwhelming. So I'm going to break it down to you in 7 steps how to start homeschooling. Number 1, you're going to relax and you're going to deschool. I recommend taking a few weeks off of school when you first take your kids out of school, because you need some time to adjust to your new norm. And your new norm is going to include things like not necessarily having to get up at a certain time, being able to stay up and follow a more natural sleep cycle for your family. It's going to involve things like figuring out how to interact with each other, because you're going to be together a lot more than what you were before. That can lead to some friction and tension. You need to figure out what your new norm is going to be and what your new expectations are going to be as a family before you need to add those academic things on there. So typically, if you were to pull your kids during the school year, the recommendation by a lot of homeschooling experts and consultants like myself would be to take some time with no academics, reconnect as a family, reconnect with the love of learning, with what kids are interested in. Also giving people a chance to kind of get that novelty of not having to go to school out of your system. And so you need to have this period of deschooling. And deschooling is exactly that. It is teaching your brain that you don't need to follow the school system. And you don't need to follow the schedule of the school system, the academics of the school system, the expectations of a school system, and the rigidity of a school system. And so it does take time, and even kids need time to break free from that. Typically the rule of thumb is 1 week to 1 month per grade that the kids were in. So kindergarten would fall under grade 1. So if you had a 3rd grader, typically the recommendation is usually anywhere from 3 weeks to 3 months of no academics, just reconnecting, for example. Now, I understand that summer's a little different because you have often 8 or 9 weeks where you can kind of do that deschooling. But I do recommend you take at least a little bit of time at the beginning of your homeschool year to do things that are not typical with school, to really give you that non-typical, break those brain cycles, experiences for yourself and for your kids. So doing some extra field trips, doing some extra like play dates during the day, maybe some projects or some reading, poetry tea times, doing things like that during those first couple of weeks of your back to school time. Something that your kids would recognize very quickly, like this is not like school, it's something very different, would be key. And then introducing academics later on. If you are brand new to homeschooling, that's what I would recommend. You also need to take some time to deschool yourself. I know so many parents who their first couple months of homeschooling try to recreate school at home, and it just leads to exhaustion and tears and frustration. And a lot of that comes out of not deschooling, not changing your own brain's understanding of what education and learning is and what it looks like. And for that, you need to definitely take some time away from curriculum and academics and do a little bit of like, I want to say like soul searching and like reprogramming in a sense. I definitely have some recommendations for books. I have 3 books that I recommend. Number 1, this is How to Start Homeschooling When You Have No Idea Where to Start. This is my book. The second edition just came out. And this is not a very long read, but it definitely gives you the things you need to do to start a little bit more in depth, and gives you some ideas on how to start your first couple of like weeks looking at schedules and things like that. Definitely a great resource. Another 2 more great resources for kind of changing your brain's thinking around learning. The Brave Learner by Julie Bogart. She is a veteran homeschool mom, and she has such an incredible approach to homeschooling. And the book is such an easy read. It's very relatable, and it shows you just how simple and fun and engaging schooling your kids at home can be. And it doesn't have to be these like hours and hours and hours of workbooks. She's got a great approach. I highly recommend it. And then the other book I always recommend to new homeschoolers is called Dumbing Us Down by John Taylor Gatto. It is a book about the school system and how it is designed to create workers, and how a lot of the things that we consider very normal in the school system, they're there for a very specific reason, and it's not the reason that we think it is, and it's not necessarily what we want for our kids. And so it is definitely a great book if you're trying to break out of that traditional school mindset. It really kind of helps put those things that are holding you back into perspective. I will put links to all 3 of those books down below. But those would be my first 3 recommendations for a new homeschooling parent. While you're relaxing, while you're deschooling, get these books and read them. So you've deschooled, you've relaxed. Now it's time to make sure that you are doing the legal piece. You want to make sure that you are checking your local requirements and that you're disenrolling. This part is tricky for a lot of people because it's very different from province to province and state to state. What you have to do varies greatly. And sometimes, depending on where you live, there are multiple options. I think Alberta has 3 different options of how to homeschool your kids. And you have to make a decision, and there are pros and cons to each of them. So you do need to look into what your specific province and state, what their rules are, what you're legally expected and required to do, and then to actually legally disenroll your children or put them into whatever the homeschooling program, school board, whatever it is in your area. I live in Ontario, so for people in Ontario, legally speaking, it's very easy. All you have to do is send a letter to your school board saying that you are going to be homeschooling your kids. You can find letters of intent is the name. You can find a letter of intent anywhere online. Just Google letters of intent to homeschool and you'll get 20 that pop up. You just need to email that to your school board, not your principal, not their teacher, the school board. And that is it if your kids have been enrolled. If your kids haven't been enrolled, you don't really need to do anything unless you need a reply. And then a quick note about that. That's a whole different thing. Some people are very anxious when they don't get a reply in the first 1, 2, 3 weeks of sending their letter. From experience and what I've seen, it first off depends on your board. Some school boards are very like, once it's sent, they don't care. They will only send you acknowledgement if you request it. Some school boards want you to fill out entire packages of work. You do not need to do that. Once you send your letter, which is why a lot of people recommend sending by email, you have a timestamp and proof that it was sent. You have done your part. But don't expect your letter of acknowledgement or your even having your email acknowledged for several weeks. Like, this is having come from the school system. Those first, like when you're coming out of like, I know some people are sending it in like end of June into July. The secretaries and the people who are working in the offices are only there for a couple weeks, and they're just wrapping things up. They're printing report cards. They're wrapping things up. They're making sure things are ready. They get a couple weeks off and then they're back. And when they're coming back, their main priority is to get new kids enrolled and to make sure that they have all of the supplies, all of the desks, all of the teachers that they need, moving around classes, making sure that there are the classes that need to be there. Their focus is not on kids who are not coming to school. Like, not at all. Their focus is on getting their own students. So don't expect a letter of acknowledgement for at least a month, if not 2, especially if you're sending it at the beginning of the school year or the end of a school year. They just don't have the time. You want to make sure that you follow the legalities, that you know what is going to be expected of you. If you have certain requirements, I know some places have things like special reports they have to send in, or they have to go for testing at a certain time of the year. You want to know what you are legally obligated to do. And then you want to make sure that your kids are disenrolled and that you know. There are a lot of organizations that will help you do that. So definitely look in your provincial or state homeschooling organizations to help you know what the requirements are. Number 3, this is kind of, I always recommend this, is to kind of look at the different approaches of homeschooling. And not that you have to make a decision, but just to know and see what's out there. You don't have to pick one. You don't have to stick exclusively with one. You might pick one and say like, this is it. This is what I believe. And then like within a year or 2, you're like, yeah, I don't think that's the case for me. There's about 9 different styles of official homeschooling. And one of those styles is eclectic, which is what I am. And we just kind of like beg, borrow, and steal from everybody. So take it with a grain of salt, but definitely look at different approaches. It can be very helpful for you to get your brain around how people are approaching learning when it's not in a school setting. It can also help you see what your values are when it comes to learning. So if you really want your kids to understand Latin and like the root of words and the Latin foundations when it comes to language, you're probably going to be looking more at like a classical education system. Whereas if you're someone who maybe wants a more gentle approach, then maybe you're looking at something a little bit more Charlotte Mason. The big thing that comes out of this is it's going to affect your ability to find a community, especially if you're looking online. You can find communities that are Charlotte Mason homeschoolers or classical homeschoolers. That can be really, really helpful. It can also help you narrow down your curriculum choices, because if you're going to be a Charlotte Mason homeschooler, you're not looking at classical curriculum because they don't really blend well. So you're definitely it's going to help you navigate those things. Like I said, you don't need to like pick one and it's not set in stone, but it's just kind of a good idea to have it in your brain as to like what this can look like and to help you find the community and help you find curriculum. Number 4, you're going to start looking at your curriculum options. I always recommend that you start with less curriculum and add as you go. Start with, a math and a language, because you can always add in other things fairly easily. Reading a picture book or a novel that is historical can be your social studies. Doing a unit study. You can find so many unit studies out there that are short and, you kind of buy them as one-offs. That can be your science unit. But when it comes to, and you can just do those as you finish them off and then just get a new one. But in terms of like something that maybe is a little bit more in depth, most homeschoolers do, who have been doing this for a while anyway, we do look at like math and language as like our foundation, and then we're using anything else as kind of bonus, because once you learn how to learn and you're able to read and you're able to do the math, then you have the skills to go and learn anything you need to learn. So definitely if you're looking for curriculums, those are kind of going to be your first focuses. I recommend would be a language and a math curriculum. And from there, you're going to want to use, like I said, your approaches to help you narrow down what you might be looking for. Ask friends, ask family, do some research, look at some reviews online. Picking curriculum is probably one of the most stressful things because there are so many options. But know that as long as you're trying your best, you'll be okay. That's always my recommendation. And my recommendation is also, when in doubt, start lower. So if you're got a kid in grade 3 and you're like, I don't know, I think maybe they're not really strong in math. Should I get them in grade 3? Pick a grade 2 level, help build that confidence up, go over those skills, and then do a grade 3. Because if you're you don't have to do a full curriculum. If you're like, hey, they've got this whole like shapes thing going down, just skip that unit, that chapter, move on to the next one. If you blow through a curriculum in 2, 3, 4 months, then you just get the next level. That would be my one recommendation, is if you're unsure whether it's between 2 levels, pick the lower one, breeze through it, build that confidence, refresh those skills, and then move on. Number 5, start slowly. I know a lot of parents who are excited to homeschool and they go so gung-ho on the first 2, 3, 4 weeks that they actually burn the kids out because they have so much that they want to do, and it's just too much, way too much. So my recommendation is to start slowly, especially if you are brand new to homeschooling. Start with one subject your first week. Then add in another subject your second week. And then add as you feel comfortable and as your kids gain some stamina. That's when you can add things, and then you have the ability, because it's much easier to add things than to take them out, because a lot of people feel like failures when they're taking subjects out. I personally, and I always let people know this, is I only teach 3 subjects at a time. We do language, we do math, and then I do a unit study that is focused on another subject, whether it is art, science, social studies, history, geography, whatever it is. That is my 3rd subject, and I do the whole month focused on those 3 subjects. For example, my first month this year is going to be math, science, and social studies, as we're in history, social studies, history, while we're studying Indigenous people of Canada, historical Indigenous groups. The next month, I think we're doing mushrooms. So that's going to be a science unit. Math, language, mushrooms, which is my science unit. That's what I'm doing for the whole month. And then I move on. I find that tends to be the easiest for me. And I'm actually doing a lot more of each subject because I'm not trying to always move on and fill my day. I tend to be able to focus and do larger chunks on specific subjects. So you don't have to do everything. Take your time, build it in slowly, start slowly, and you can always add things as you feel the need to fill the day. Or maybe you don't need to fill the day. Number 6 would be make connections. And when I'm talking about connections, I'm talking about finding homeschoolers in your area. I know so many people are like, oh, there's no one who homeschools in my town. There's no one here. I can almost certainly guarantee you there is somebody who is homeschooling in your area. Unless you are living in the middle of nowhere, there's probably a homeschooler nearby. Especially post-pandemic, there are so many parents who took up homeschooling during the pandemic and have just continued on. There's a lot of things that have kind of changed for the better for homeschoolers in a sense post-pandemic, because so many people saw what schooling was actually like and how homeschooling could actually function within their family. And so there are significantly more homeschoolers now than there were in 2019, 2020. There are homeschoolers. And if you look, you might have to drive a little bit, but I guarantee you there's somebody who is nearby. And so you want to definitely start to try to find your homeschool community. Sometimes that's an online community if you're really in the middle of nowhere, but oftentimes that can be a co-op. It can be a daytime class. It can be maybe a group that meets regularly. There are lots out there. You just need to look and sometimes put yourself out there. I know that's hard. I am an introvert. I am well aware of how difficult it is to put yourself out there. Do I get stressed out about it? Sometimes, yes. But you also need to be able to have people who understand the realities of what homeschooling is really like, to be able to vent to them, to be able to ask them questions, to be able to get some support, to be able to share like, hey, this is what I'm using. What are you using? Okay. Hey, that's kind of cool. Can I look at that? Okay. Yeah, maybe I'll try that. Like, you having that community of parents and as well as of kids is essential. And so it's definitely something you want to start with. Connections are so important. Relationships are so important. And when you have a great homeschooling community around you and you've built that community can be whatever you want it to be. But when you have that underneath you and to support you, it makes homeschooling so much easier. It's also a really great bribe. I'm not even going to lie. I have learned very quickly, especially this year. My kids have made some really, really strong connections this past year. Now that they've been able to, we've had more events since, post-pandemic. Their connections have gotten so deep with some friends that in our homeschool community, and it is a great bribe. I've used it many times. Listen, co-op starts at 1:00. If you are not done your schoolwork or your chores by 1:00, we can't go. Let me assure you, those chores and those chores and those workbooks are done pretty darn quick once that bribe comes out. So, or maybe it's not a bribe. Maybe it's more of like a natural consequence, right? Yeah, let's call it that. A natural consequence. If you haven't done this, then you won't be able to do that. It has been a game changer, and I've really seen my kids kind of blossom and grow and then like share educational things. I've got Alexi is like writing stories with her friends just for fun. They're sending each other messages and writing letters. It is fantastic. And so building the community is key and it's important. And I think it's really something you should focus on, especially in your first year or two of homeschooling. Find your people, find your community, build them. Lastly, make a plan. And it doesn't have to be a detailed plan, but have a rough plan for a couple different things. I'm a big believer that failing to plan is planning to fail. Having a light plan helps in so many ways. So I have a light daily routine, rhythm. It doesn't have times, but it has, after breakfast, we do morning basket. Then we get dressed. Then we do workbooks. Then we do chores. Then it's free time. Then it's lunch. However long that takes, sometimes those free time is very, very short. Because by the time they did all their things, it was only 5 minutes. That's just reality. But it's kind of this like rhythm and routine of like, this is what happens and then this happens and then this happens. I have that daily. I have a rough week outline of like what typically happens in a week. Mondays we're at home and we do tea parties. Tuesdays we have gymnastics and then we have choir. Wednesdays we meet up with our co-op. And the girls have girl guides. On Fridays, we do this. On Saturday, like just having a rough outline of where you're doing, where your socialization is going to happen when you have classes, kind of a rough plan for your week is also very helpful. And then I also have a rough annual plan. By annual plan, I don't have page numbers. I don't have chapters. I have, for math and language, I kind of just like flip through the book and go in order as we go, 1 to 3 pages a day, depending on what it is. And then I just have kind of like, hey, this is the topic we're doing in September. This is the topic we're doing in October. This is the topic that we're going to study in November. And just kind of having that as my like rough plan. We're going to take a break in this week. We're going to have, because, dad's going to be out of town. We're going to go do this thing instead. Having kind of a rough plan for a couple of months. I do a full year. I know I'm a little excessive, but like, even if it's like you're from like September to Christmas, these are the things that we're going to do kind of like lightly planned out. It's fantastic. It helps you know what to expect. And then it also takes a lot of that like creative process off of you because you've done it all in one shot. So you're not constantly like, okay, so what's coming next? What am I going to do next week? I don't know what I'm going to do next week. Now I have to go online. I have to figure out what we're going to do next week. that can be really exhausting. So if you take like an hour or two and just kind of sit down and figure out what you're going to do for a couple months in terms of topics, library books that you might pick, like I actually make like lists of library books and like save lists on my online library account. When it's time, I just go click, 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 all the books on mushrooms. And voila, they appear in my library within the next like 3 to 5 days. And I just pick them up. You can do things like that. Having a light plan, it just helps. I promise you it helps. A little bit of planning does make your life a little bit easier. That's it. Those are the 7 things. You need to relax and deschool. You need to check your local legal requirements and disenroll your kids. You need to look at your approaches and kind of make some decisions there. You need to pick a little bit of curriculum. You can always add more, but start with the basics. You start slowly and add as you need. Make some connections in your community and make a light plan for your next several months. That's it. That's how you start homeschooling. It is not complicated, but it does make a big difference. Thank you so much for watching. If you guys have questions or comments, please leave them down below. Make sure that you're following me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. I put a lot of information up there and you can see how I run my homeschooling with my kids. And if you want to get even more personal connection, make sure that you guys become YouTube members. You can join my YouTube membership family and you get all kinds of perks. There's different levels ranging from, getting special stickers and badges and priority commenting all the way up to getting unit study breakdowns with me, private chats, Q&As, and everything in between. Merch, coupons, all kinds of stuff. So that is something you might want to consider is becoming a member of my YouTube community as well. So thank you so much for watching and I'll see you guys next week. Bye.